Good afternoon, everybody. Well, after those very flattering words by Professor Keenan, I'm not quite sure whether I dare to speak. Whatever I'll say, will disappoint you. In comparison with what Mark said. But anyway, I would first of all, thank you, Mark, for choosing this theme of your conference, life and death, which is something which too many people tend to close their eyes for, unless there is some kind of political, ideological benefit from doing it. And thank you, of course, for inviting a non-specialist on Russia to this grand event, with all this large number of very interesting specialist panels. So much, for the preliminaries. So let's start, by talking about inequality, which is not reducible to what you can read in Thomas Piketty, for instance, or the conventional social sciences or the conventional media. It's actually something much broader, much deeper, much more painful than this kind of economically dominated conventional discourse is. Inequality is literally a matter of life and death. And that's why, my work on inequality in English is called The Killing Fields of Inequality. Now, inequality in a sociological and social science sense may be defined as a historical social construction whereby possibilities of realizing human capability are allocated unequally. And it has three different fundamental dimensions which interact and are to some extent interdependent, but they're also irreducible to each other, and the trajectories over time differ. First of all, the matters of life and death in the literal sense, vital inequality, which we can measure in inequalities of life expectancy, health expectancy, mortality rates at different ages. And it's secondly something which is very rarely dealt with in terms of inequality, but is something very, very painful to the victims of it, which is the refusal of respect, of recognition, or the refusal of autonomy, of being able, to decide for yourself how you want to live and whom you want to partner with, what kind of job you want to pursue, what kind of studies you will make. All these, and these features, in many ways, the most prominent manifestations of it are racism and sexism or patriarchy, which when we sum them up, all under the rubric of existential inequality. And thirdly, we have something more familiar from the conventional discussion about resource inequality, which is not only income and wealth, although that's a very convenient measure and something which can be handily compared over time and space. But we will also look at inequalities of education or inequalities of power. A very important dimension, but it is very, very difficult, to put into some kind of comparative metric. I'm not going to give you a lecture on inequality. So I just saw some. Is this supposed to function? Let's see if it does. Yes. Instead, I'll give you a freehand sketch of that curves of inequality. It's not a beautiful picture, but neither is inequality. So I don't quite apologize for it. On the vertical axis, you have the possibilities of human capability realization. Possibilities human beings have to realize their capabilities, whatever they are. And on the horizontal axis, you have the lifespan. And there are three features of this, or four perhaps, 3.5, of this little sketch I would like to draw your attention to. First of all, it's not, the two curves do not represent extremes in any way. I mean, you can rather see them as curves for the median working class member and the median middle class or upper middle class member. Although there's no particular metric here, so it's rather it's an ordinal scale rather than a metric one. But then there are three specific features of it. One is that the advantage curve doesn't start at origo. And that means that this idea that all humans are born equal is not true. And now we have, very hard scientific data at one of the most interesting front lines of biomedicine and social biology, epigenetics, which highlight the effects of the social environment of the mother on fetal development. And fetal development tend to have, on a probabilistic, in a probabilistic way, life-enduring effects. So people from the lower classes are born disadvantaged. Not just, when they come into this world, but at the very moment when they sort of emerge from the mother's womb. And this holds not only for poor countries, but also for rich countries, that the social environments of the mothers affect, fetal development. The second aspect of these two curves is that the advantages culminate over the life course, and normally tend to culminate at the end of adulthood. And thirdly, of course, the lifespans are different all over the world. Poor people, lower class people die first. And that's a general rule. So that inequality, I think, should be seen, can be summarized as this kind of life curve experiences of stunted possibilities of realizing your human capability. Now, the welfare states, which I was asked to say something about, have an interesting relationship to inequality. On the one hand, we can now say, with abundant evidence, that welfare states are the most important actually existing institutions for reducing inequality of all kinds, vital, existential, and resource inequality. This is largely an unintended effect, because welfare states were never originated for egalitarian egalitarian reasons, and only briefly in some countries there was a period in which there was a concern for equality. But nevertheless, the welfare states have had this effect, although to a very, very varying extent. And I shall give you one example of that in a minute, of the great variability of the inequality effects of welfare states. Now, if they didn't develop for egalitarian reasons, what were then, the background to the development of welfare states? Well, one of them was urban safety, very important in development of public health, and sanitation, water, minimally decent housing. Another very important thing was concerned with social peace and social order. Vogel, the main advisor of Bismarck on social insurance, had been to Paris with the Prussian troops in 1871 and had seen the Paris Commune on the horizon and came back horrified by the threat of the new dangerous working class emerging in Europe. And this prompted, the Bismarck proposals of social policy, which are often regarded in conventional histories as the starting point of modern welfare states. There were other reasons: market insecurity, compensation, that was the social insurance principle. There was, very importantly, national population investments, which were very important almost everywhere, certainly in Sweden in the 1930s and 1940s. And it was made most explicit in the British Commission in, I think, in 1909 on social policy issues. It started out, from the experience of the Boer War, the imperial war against the Boers in South Africa, which the British finally won. But anyway, the conclusion was, it's impossible to run an empire with a working class like this, because the fourth, or the people who had been called up for military service, had to be dismissed because they were physically too weak, to function even to cannon fodder. So that's why, social, this was the main pitch for development of pensions and other social policies in Britain over 1909. And there are, of course, interesting concessions you have to make as a politician, lots of categorical social benefits derived from that. And finally, you have the secularization of old religious charity. But you don't find equality as a major rationale for welfare state development. The actual record of welfare states with respect to inequality is quite mixed. Although, as I said, it's the most important, most successful institution in reducing inequality, but nevertheless, it's certainly not an ideal or perfect institution as it has functioned so far. With respect to vital inequality, there has the welfare state measures taken broadly, including public health, has certainly produced a general improvement of life and health expectancy. And after World War II, there's even been a tendency of convergence of life expectancy in the world due to international efforts, which was broken in 1990 for two reasons: the outbreak of AIDS in Southern Africa and the outbreak of capitalism in the collapsing Soviet Union. We'll come back to that. But interestingly enough, Within countries, welfare states have not been able to reduce the gap in life expectancy. And this holds also, I mean, for the Nordic welfare states, and certainly including Finland, and for that matter, my native country, Sweden. And the gap in life expectancy between classes is actually increasing in most of the rich countries. With respect to existential inequality, there have been several effects. Women have benefited, I mean, quite a lot from the education expansion and from welfare state employment. Affirmative action has been quite significant in a number of countries, including India, to the extent, I mean, that middle-ranked classes of states demonstrations claiming we are backward too, and want to have, I mean, the special treatment of backward castes. And welfare states have unionized that behavior of beneficiaries, of patients, of people in their care quite a lot since the 1950s. Unevenly shifting from country to country, but nevertheless there's a huge difference of being in the hands of public old age care today compared to what it was before World War II. The resource effects have been limited with respect to access to higher education, but they have been very important with regard to income distribution. In the OECD countries, if we take out the Mexico and Chile, the market income distribution, the inequality of the market income distribution was reduced by a third on the average. In the Scandinavian countries, about 40%. It's a huge change, something which you can't learn, I mean, from Thomas Piketty's otherwise very interesting book on inequality, but it neither deals with life and death, nor with welfare states. But again, the differences between countries and continents is very large. Europe and Latin America have roughly the same market income distribution, but whereas the inequality is reduced by a third or more in Europe, in the best of cases in Latin America nowadays, it's 7 or 8%, and on the average it's just 3 percentage points. So it's roughly the same. And in the 1990s, the welfare state of Brazil was actually had regressive effects. Disposable income after taxes and transfers was actually slightly more unequal than before. Current tendencies with respect to the welfare state, well, one thing we should notice, particularly, I mean, who live in the northern periphery, is that the welfare state is growing and expanding in large parts of the world. In China, very much after 2000, in India, in Indonesia, and in the first decade of the 21st century in Latin America. It has stopped now, and the Brazilian, right now, government in Brazil has just decided that to cap all public expenditure for 20 years. But for about 10 years, I mean, there was a great expansion of the welfare state in Latin America. On the other hand, and that's something we know more directly because we have seen it nearby. There have been attacks on the collective solidarity principle of welfare states in favor of privatization and marketization. This was in the 1990s. The World Bank launched a major offensive against public social rights, particularly pensions, and targeting two continents in particular, or two areas, Latin America and Eastern Europe. And they even published a manual how politicians should prepare the ground, for abolishing collective pensions by deliberately underfunding them and running them down so that you could then sell the individual financial savings to the population. And they were rather successful in Eastern Europe. I remember, when I was in Budapest in 1996, when the World Bank, flew in a whole plane load of economists arguing for the necessity, to smash collective pensions and to privatize, to abolish collective social rights, the citizen social rights, for instance, for market property rights. All the social policy experts in Hungary and neighboring countries who were there were pretty skeptical, but the politicians were sort of, you could really see, how their mouths were sort of watering at the possibility of creating new areas of financial markets by abolishing civic pensions. So the global picture of welfare states is complex, but it's contrary to the alarm bell in many rich countries on the left about the welfare state being dismantled or abolished and so on. It's still standing, but under attack, but still standing and still very important in redistributing life chances. I'd say a few words about Russia, the current Russia, the current historical context. Not very much, because I know, this is a gathering of specialists. Let's say a few words about the welfare trajectory of Russia. And the starting point, I guess, is or one starting point, could be the eve of the revolution in 1913. And the Human Development Index is something developed by the UN Human Development Program, and it's a somewhat complex summary index of life expectancy, birth, literacy, and gross national income. And in 1913, Russia was clearly at the very bottom of Europe, well below even Bulgaria, apparently. But that was the starting point. Then then was again the USSR, and there were for some time a kind of catching up, which peaked in 1965, when female life expectancy in Russia was about the same as in the United States, and the male life expectancy was just 2.5 years shorter in comparison to 15 years in 1896. And in terms of Human Development Index, Russia had moved up passing by Bulgaria, Hungary, Spain, very close to Italy, and higher than war-ravaged Japan. And the distance to the United States and to Finland had been reduced, but it was still there. Then, for reasons I, at least, don't quite understand, the achievements stopped, and you have in the 1970s life expectancy declined, not very dramatically, but it did in the 1970s, and after that it stagnated. And it had a general social stagnation in Eastern Europe after 1970 as well. And you also had a much smaller expansion in Eastern Europe and in the USSR of social expenditure after 1960 in comparison with Western Europe. But then we come to the 1990s, where, according to the previous period, a few mistakes were made. I think, that from a human point of view, it was a disaster. Income inequality jumped from, according to some of the best measures, from 27 in 1990 to 46 in 1993. Whatever the exact figures, it is the fastest increase ever recorded on a national scale. And life expectancy fell by 6 years from 1990 to 1994, 4 years for women. The standardized birth rate for people over 16 increased by almost 50% for men and a quarter for 24% for women within 5 years. There have been several estimates about the number of people extra who died, because of this restoration. One of them has come to the conclusion that something between 2.5 and 3 million people extra died between 1992 and 2001. And that is, if you calculate the comparative base, if the mortality rate, age standardized mortality rate of Russia had remained the same as in 1991, which was not a brilliant year of Russian mortality. And if you had another base, a more long-term mortality trend of Russia, the extra deaths would, of course, be many more, but at least 2.5 to 3 million. According to some other estimates, more than 5 million people. And among the people running Russia in the 1990s as part of the American team was a Swedish economist whose name, I think, for clemency reasons I'll not mention, who wrote several articles about the importance of speeding up privatization. The faster the better. Now we have good data showing, it's a study by a colleague of mine in Cambridge of Russian company towns. And they show that the fast privatization, when everything was privatized within 2 years, increased mortality in that town by 20% in comparison with slower, more gradual privatization. As you should suspect, the class structuration of these tests was very strong. The mortality gap in life expectancy and education widened between 1980 and 2001, widened from 3 years in 1980 to 11 years in 2001 for men, and from 1-2 years for women to 9 years. And what happened in the period from 1991 to 2003 was that life expectancy among university-educated men and women increased by 4 or 5 years, whereas the rest of the population had their life shortened. No wonder, I mean, that there wasn't much attention on the Russian intelligentsia to what happened to mortality. There has been some recovery after 2000, at least in 2000 to 2014. Between 1990 and 1995, 17 countries in the world passed by Russia in human development. In 2014, 4 of them had been, or Russia had taken over, I mean, overtaken 4 of them: Uruguay, Barbados, Romania, and Malaysia. And in spite of its higher national income, Russia has a considerably lower life expectancy than China and Russia, even and Brazil, even after the recovery of life expectancy after 2005 or 7 or something. And income inequality has also declined considerably, although it's contested how much. And according to the Aleksanteri income study, the Gini index in Russia today is the same as that of the UK, although the ratio between the richest and the poor is higher in Russia. And these Gini coefficients are always, whoever make them, always with margins of error. But nevertheless, I mean, there was a slight, or well, not just slight, a significant, or how much I don't know, but significant equalization of income after 2003. So finally, we may say a few things about the lessons from Russia. Well, I mean, the first thing I think is that the inequality produced by economic systems and their regulation or non-regulation are matters of life and death. And secondly, the capitalist restoration in Russia was the largest human catastrophe in Europe after World War II. There was no other catastrophe in which at a minimum 2.5 and perhaps 5 million died. But another lesson was how structured opinion channels are. Nobody cared. I mean, who cares about, I mean, 2.5 million Russians who are going to fall by the wayside and die? So they're useless anyway. When Giovanni Andrea Cormica, an Italian economist and working for UNICEF, was in Russia with a team of demographers in the mid-1990s, after much trouble, I mean, he managed to get an audience with some representatives of the Yeltsin government and his American advisors, and tried to present, I mean, that the demographic catastrophe was actually happening in Russia. And these people were sort of, according to Korniak, were just sort of looking out of the window, I mean, completely bored, no interest whatsoever. Finally, I think we should also remember, I mean, that in that specific drama, Russian experiences highlight much wider contemporary social issues. One is the widening gaps in life and health expectancy, which is a general tendency of developed countries and welfare states. This is largely due to the relative increase of the gap by the rising life expectancy of the upper middle classes. But in some countries, like in Russia, mortality among the lower classes, or the most disadvantaged people, is also rising in the United States and in Finland. You only need to go into the Finnish demographers to tell you, I mean, that this is something we know about from Finland as well. That's another Russian lesson on